Now then, as we're talking about these criminal elements, and I've been talking about some of these really famous bank robbers and gangsters that have progressed through various cultural elements to have adapted a lot of military, paramilitary, even I guess you would say warrior mentality, that soldier mentality, into the way they do things. You should also understand something here, right? I'm from West Virginia. Despite all the stories and the claims and the jokes about us being inbred hillbillies who run around barefoot and only have, two teeth. See, uh, they're not real. The fact that we're supposed to be uneducated and stupid and talk like this, no. The fact of the matter is, however, there is an element to this that you need to understand. People in West Virginia, in particular, are pretty much poor. We're a very poor state. Being a very poor state, I've seen things in West Virginia which I've seen in third world countries, to be honest with you. And a lot of elements to it are very much like living in a third world country, except everybody speaks English. Now, that being said, you have to understand something. Most people in West Virginia go into the military to get out of West Virginia. So a lot of criminals in West Virginia have that military training, or they're related to someone with military training. Uh, and these people, many of these people, especially when you're poor, they pass on that knowledge to their children. Uh, Sometimes it's hand-to-hand combatives, sometimes it's survival training, a lot of times it's how to use a firearm or marksmanship. In fact, in the military, we when I say we, I'm talking about people from West Virginia. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Mexican, Latino, Chinese, whatever. If you've been born and raised here, chances are that you have some family member who's in the military. And if you say you're from the military in the Army or the Marine Corps, and they hand you a rifle, they expect you to be able to qualify as expert. Um, Gun culture is big here. And it's big here because a lot of people turn to the military or come from the military. When they retire, they come back to West Virginia. We're basically a retirement community, just without the sun and the sand and the beaches like Florida. Now, that mentality is there, and you also have to understand. One of the elements of West Virginia is that we had the Battle of Blair Mountain. This was the second largest insurrection on U.S. soil, next to the Civil War. And the governor of West Virginia at the time actually had to call out the National Guard, and they actually brought out active Army soldiers to engage farmers armed with single shot, double shot, or double barrel shotguns and pistols. I'm not talking semi-automatics. I'm talking revolvers and deer rifles. The thing about it is, and I'm not bragging about my state like, yeah, I'm cleaning my hood. We're all a bunch of rednecks who shoot guns. No, it's nothing like that. It's actually the point that warrior, that soldier mentality is bred into us. And it's also bred into us. I mean, if you're of Irish descent, if you're up there in Boston, and I know there's somebody in Boston watching this video, I promise you there is, who's went out and got shit faced on St. Patrick's Day, who's sitting there thinking, yeah, yeah, yeah. But 9 times out of 10, if you're talking to a person who is of Irish descent, that idea of being the fighting Irish, of being tough and having a soldier or a warrior's mentality, is drilled into you. It's just a part of culture. It's a part of growing up being poor. Now, African Americans, same thing. There's a lot of that element there, that being a soldier, being tough, being hard, is drilled into you. And here's the thing about it. Now, when you're talking about a group of people who are poor and they are conditioned socially, they're in a social environment where being tough, being strong become factors, become things which are desired, which are things which are considered manly, and that you have to prove to be considered a man. What happens with this is that when it's very easy to influence them by trying to make them a man, especially when they're young, because that soldier idea, that idea of being a soldier, being a warrior, of having that mental toughness, is especially overlooked by younger people. They don't see the philosophy, they don't see the ideology, they don't see that aspiration to be mentally tough. They see being physically tough and that being a badass, and that's usually what gets them in a lot of trouble. Uh, but that whole culture of being tough means you have, or that being a man means that you have to be tough. You have to be willing to fight to protect your family, fight to protect what's yours, that you have to be willing to fight for what you believe in, is hammered into us, especially in the South, especially among poor people throughout the nation, probably throughout the world. I can't speak too many or too many other cultures, but it's there. And the thing about this is that that mentality, especially during times of war or after times of war, uh, tends to stick with people. It tends to manifest as the levels of violence, the types of violence that affect them in their lives that they're influenced by, uh, begins to take over. And that same mentality that I'm talking about here, that same idea, that same spirit of being a warrior, that same spirit of being tough, is that same connection to the military or to the paramilitary. Uh, if it's drilled into a person at a social level as part of their culture, if you will, uh, and there's multiple cultures that do this, what happens is it can be exploited by other people. Now, when you talk about the Black Guerrilla Family, the Aryan Brotherhood, or the Mexican Mafia, all three are talking about cultures where the idea of being a warrior, of being tough to prove your manhood, is a factor, and all three also manipulate that to uh, give the recruits, to give these street soldiers, to give the whatever you want to call them, uh, to indoctrinate them into this thought process of how to think, of what to think. And when they do this, they give them a little bit of knowledge, but that knowledge comes with a little bit of the sacrifice of who their personal identity is. They have to let the group identity take over. And when you're already influenced from a social culture where the group identity is that of being a fighter or being tough or anything like that, this is something that plays heavily on the mind. It manifests very heavily on the individual. You add to this training, even bad training, like a lot of what I pointed out, some of the training that I pointed out in the Drunken Wolverine Ninja Kung Fu video, that these people adapt a certain lifestyle, a certain frame of mind. And that influence of the military, of paramilitary tactics, of paramilitary philosophy has always been there in low income areas. It takes more of a manifest in crime as group identity begins to replace the individual identity. Now, as that happens, what begins to occur, it's just like being in a cult. The individual tries to make themselves into this ideological model, and they can't do that, so over time they eventually suffer mental breakdown. But as they're trying to form themselves into this ideological mold, they have to leave away certain elements of themselves. They have to chip away at certain elements of themselves. They have to throw out certain parts of themselves. You can't listen to a certain type of music. You can't talk to a certain type of people. You can't read a certain type of books, or you can only read a certain type of books, or you can only listen to this type of music, or you can only do this or only do that. And it creates a dividing line, and that dividing line exists to separate the individual from those other elements in his life which might prevent him from following the group ideology. This is one of these key factors that I'm going to discuss further on in this web series, and I'm doing this primarily for educational value. I hope everyone around me finds some element of this that they feel that they can apply or use in their self-defense training.